Hello. So today we're going to have a new edition, the second part of the Second Punic War. I think having this kind of mini-series, the first two parts were ASMR style, so you not only have material to listen while you're cooking, studying, working, but you also have material when you're going to sleep for you to listen to some kind of historical facts and of course about history itself. I mentioned about different facts about the Roman Empire, and I'm going to make this a bit different. This is an ASMR style because I want you to have formats for both moments in your daily life. There were like three wars in total, 3 Punic wars, and then I want to continue with others. So we already read a bit and talked a bit about the first one, and something really interesting was that for example, on the first Punic War, even the person who won it, the Romans, were already in a big debt. And also something interesting is that in my perspective, nobody won because even the winner lost a lot of money, a lot of people, and were already like in debt. So for me, based on that, there were like no winner. And when there is like no winner, you might think that nothing was like worth it. We have like this time where people wanted to conquer more lands, wanted to conquer over others, wanted to straddle cultures, wanted to adapt and to change those cultures because they wanted to be the leaders. They wanted to gather power through land. Nowadays, having power through land passed to a second stage. We want to be better developers, want to have richness in terms of science, politics, wanted to conquer some type of material, engineering, and others. So back in the day, before Christ, this was like completely understandable. As long as you have like a large amounts of land, you will have power in order to command others. So that was the priority. You were measured in how many doctors you had, how many charcoal, for example, or any other kind of source that you had. That was important. But as long as you have like a massive amount of land, that was where the majority of the richness and powers was coming from. So I was also debating with myself, like I cannot judge these wars with the eyes of today, because today we weren't like conquering like that anymore. We have different priorities, different type of things that we consider more important and that could make us have like an important point in the map. With that being said, I've been getting the information from Encyclopedia Britannica. So the Second Punic War was around 1800 to 2001. And remember, this was a series of war between the Roman Republic and the Carthaginian Empire. At the end, they were independent, but at what cost? In order for the Romans to give them like the independence they wanted, they needed to be like in a pretty bad stage in their own republic. They were really fighting for and pursuing. When they were like in critical critical terms of problems, financial problems, social problems. They were also having civil wars after the First Punic War. It didn't only bring death and massive amount of afterwards travel, like loss of income, a lot of it, ships, lots of it, and men. They were also debating on this new kind of first stages of this empire. They were also fighting with themselves about the power, and they used this excuse as a big stage of not having any kind of balance, trying to fight for the power. So they were coming from a big war, and they started different amounts of wars inside their own territory. So that was another bad consequence we talked before. In the years after the First Punic War, Rome wrested Corsica and Sardinia from Carthage, and forced Carthaginians to pay an even greater indemnity than the payment that we already paid before. Eventually, however, under the leadership of Barca, his son Hannibal, and his son-in-law Hasdrubal, Carthage acquired a new base in Spain, once they could renew the war against Rome. So they wanted to continue. Why? I don't know. I think like at this point, I'm in the middle between trying to figure out what they were thinking. Were they fighting because of pride? Were they fighting because of bravery? And what's up? While I was reading, I couldn't perceive that they were fighting for some kind of money, some kind of resources. The main point is independence and land. Of course, Rome, the Roman Republic, they wanted to keep conquering more land. That was like their main goal. And at some point, that was one of the flaws that they had when the Roman Empire was ending. But the Carthaginians, they were like feeling behind. They wanted so much their independence. But was it all? Was that everything that they wanted? I'm still figuring that out, because pursuing a second war after the big consequences that they faced, that's like a big statement and something important that they did. In 2019, Hannibal captured Sagunto on the east coast of the Iberian Peninsula. Rome demanded his withdrawal, but Carthage refused to recall him, and Rome declared war. Because Rome controlled the sea, Hannibal led his army overland through Spain and Gaul and across the Alps, arriving in the plain of the Po River Valley in 218 BC with 2,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. I don't know, with this words I always say in my head like cavalry. But look at this. So because they return someone, they just send 2,000 men. So when we recall about the previous war, we know that Rome was in debt. They ended the war, but as I mentioned before, from our perspectives, they were like some kind of winner, because they were also pending to pay a lot of money. They needed that money to continue the war, but they didn't have those kind of resources. They also lost like a massive portion of their ships, and they were ruined, but they still won apparently. So if while pursuing this type of war, there's some kind of setting like a long term of this debt, because where are they taking more money? they were in like a pretty good shape after they ended the first war. So now they are going to continue the second one. What would you do in that scenario? Like, you face like a massive losses. Suffer, like you lost like a lot of men, a lot of money, and then you gain like some portion of land, which is good, but you have like a huge amount of that behind. Would you pursue a new war, or would you just stay as you are? And we're trying to sell like your brains back in those days, knowing that you are the Roman Republic. I'm trying. Yeah. Roman troops tried to bar his advance, but were outmatched, and Hannibal's hold over northern Italy and was established. In 1700, Hannibal reinforced and marched south. Rather than attacking Rome directly, he marched to Capua, the second largest town in Italy back in the day, hoping to add or to incite some kind of rebellion. He wanted people to rise. Again, he won several battles, but still refrained from attacking the city of Rome. And I think that was like a clever thing to do. A brilliant defensive strategy conducted by Quintus harried the Carthaginians without offering battle. Thus, the two armies remained deadlocked on the Italian peninsula until 2011, when Rome recaptured the city of Capua. So they're constantly like going back and forth. And at this point, let me tell you, would you still pursue this war? I mean, the Carthaginians, they're like a lot behind, right? They don't have a lot of forces, they lost a lot of territory, and now they're like simply behind. Would you still pursue your dream? They are already independent. Not in full, but they are already independent. So let's keep going. In 2007, Hasdrubal, following Hannibal's route, crossed the Alps, reached northern Italy with another large army supported by legions of Ligurians and Gauls. Hasdrubal marched down the peninsula to join Hannibal for an assault on Rome. Rome, exhausted by war, as we were mentioning before, nevertheless raised and dispatched an army to check Hasdrubal. Gaius Nero, commander of the southern Roman army, slipped away north also and defeated Hasdrubal on the banks of the Metaurus River. I like when I use my accent to read this, but I use it as some kind of defense for me to have the card and say like, hey, this is how I pronounce it, and I think it's good because of my language or because of my native language. But you can correct me if you want, no problem. Hannibal maintained his position in southern Italy until 2003, when he was ordered to return to Africa. Something I've also noticed that they couldn't leave behind Africa ever. Like, every time Africa had a break, we're like some part of sections in history, but never something like pretty like ascending and having everything without any cuts in their history. They're also been messing up with Africa back then. Italy was free of enemy troops for the first time in 15 years. During the long mainland campaign, fighting had continued as well on Sardinia and Sicily, which had become Rome's chief sources of food. I think this is going to happen. After knowing that, I think this is going to end bad. Aided by the internal upheaval in Syracuse, Carthage reestablished its presence on the island in 215, and maintained it until 210. Meanwhile, in Spain, Roman forces maintained Frisian or Carthaginian strongholds. The Roman general Publius Scipio, the name, won a decisive battle at Ilipa in 206 and forced the Carthaginians out of Spain. So they were losing again. I understand how this can be really having you like the sense here in your chest after that of hopeless, feeling like hopeless for your own country or empire. We're not talking about countries, we're talking about empires. So having you like not again. Like we're tired, like not again, but we're still like losing. We will never be free entirely. Like the Romans, they got us again. So I can feel like that sensation of feeling lost again. And that could be something like frustrating a lot. After his Spanish victory in Scipio, that sounds like a city's name actually, not like a commander's name. Sorry. Well, he determined to invade the Carthaginian homeland. He sailed for Africa in 204 and established a beachhead. The Carthaginian council offered terms of surrender, of course, but renegade at the last minute. Or just denied at the last minute. Why was that? Pinning its hopes on the last battle. The massed Carthaginian army led by Hannibal was defeated at Zama. The Carthaginians accepting Scipio's terms for peace. Carthage was forced to pay an indemnity and surrender its navy, and Spain and the Mediterranean islands were ceded to Rome. Okay, so we already have the answer to the initial question. They continue because Rome decided to ask for more payment after they lost the war. And I could understand, like, if they already have part of my territory and they are claiming more, I will be furious too. And still having like that sensation like, oh, I just lost and now you just want to take it all. So I can understand that they could be just fighting to gain that back and to have it all, at least like some kind of portion to call their own. But I want to talk a bit more in depth of what happens in the wars of inside Italy, what happened inside of Spain, and of course what happened inside Africa, because that's the most intriguing one, at least for me. So the war in Italy, Hannibal's forces were now inadequate to match the army of Scipio, who had rushed to the Po River to protect the recently founded Roman colonies of Placentia and Cremona. The first significant action between the two armies took place on the Po Plains, west of the Ticino River, and Hannibal's forces prevailed. Scipio was severely wounded, and the Romans withdrew to Placentia. After many losses, in order to lead, they were also failed to lead the second engagement. Hannibal successfully guided the army of Sempronius Longus into battle. What an elegant name, don't you think? On the left bank of the Trebia River, and that is placed like on the south of Placentia. That was in December 219. The Roman force was soundly defeated, although it is likely that the wounded Scipio did not take part in the battle, and it is uncertain if any of his legions were part of the action. So that's a mystery. That victory brought both Gauls and Ligurians to Hannibal's side. That were the local people, I suppose. And his army was considerably augmented by Celtic recruits. After a severe winter, Hannibal was able to advance in the spring of 217. As far as the Arno River marshes, where he lost an eye to infection. Oh my god. Although the Roman armies were now in the field against him, he was able to reach a new place called Cordon, nowadays Cortona. But actually he was able to fight in open combat in the Battle of Lake Trasimene. Hannibal's troops, but they were again fighting against the Roman army there. You know what this means? Around 15,000 soldiers, many of whom were driven into the lake to water on top. You know what I mean? Water on top. I have to sometimes talk in some kind of unknown language because I cannot say some words. So sorry about that. YouTube guidelines. The Carthaginian troops were either too worn to clinch their victories and march on Rome, or Hannibal considered the city to be too well fortified. Hannibal, furthermore, nurtured the vain hope that the Italian allies of Rome would defeat and cause civil war. So he wanted to do the same that happened in Carthage. He wanted people to fight against each other, trying to create a conflict in Rome in order to start some kind of internal dispute so he could get advantage. That was clever because that happened to them. After he learned that lesson, he knew where he could actually damage an already established empire. So that was clever from him. That was really clever. And I think that could even work today. That's why we rely on history to know what were the consequences, the victories, and everything about what happened in the past. Because we can actually get some tactics and say like, hey, this was very smart. But I know where he was going. Even though they had like different victories, they ended up like losing like their territory and losing a lot of men. I think at some point they had like this big of hope that probably everything wouldn't be ending up like the First Punic War. But at the end, reality hits back again like, hey, let's stop. Let's stop. You know what happened last time? I know that they had like all of the disadvantages out there. But even though they survived as a small empire, at least smaller than the Roman Republic, they were able to prevail strong and with hope. Now we're going to continue with the wars in Spain and Africa. Meanwhile, Roman successes in Spain dealt severe blows to Carthaginian power and having like their colonies. In 208, Hasdrubal, we have Hasdrubal back again, detaching a force from the main Carthaginian army, crossed the Alps to go to Hannibal's aid. Hasdrubal's army was defeated. However, at Minterus in northern Italy, that was 207, before the Carthaginian armies could effect a junction, Hasdrubal was was in the battle, and his severed head was delivered to Hannibal's camp. Oh my god, we have scandalo. That reportedly led Hannibal to sorrow. I mean, that would feel like pretty shocking to see, because he was the leader of the First Punic War, and now the leader is dead. And now it's like playing chess at some point. They passed to the other side, the leader, and now what would you do? What would you do? It was like similar to having some kind of king. They didn't have one. They were trying to create their own empire, but at the meantime, he was the leader. So what would you do after your leader? It's like on the other side of heaven. What would you do? There lies the fate of Carthage. That's what he said. His last hope of making a recovery in central Italy thus dashed. Hannibal concentrated his forces in Bruttium, where with the help of his Romanian allies, he was able to resist Roman pressure for 4 more years. So they resisted, and they resisted a lot. Having everything against them, they resisted a lot. So that's like a pretty huge thing to do. Your leader was passed to another part of the cosmos, and now you have like people still supporting you, and that's pretty great. Good job, Carthage. Scipio elected consul in 205. Sorry if I committed that mistakes in the past. Say like something about 2000. You just know that it's only 3 digits by now. 3 digits so far. Overcame opposition within the Senate and won approval to take the fight to North Africa. What was he doing there? Breaking Carthage's principal ally, the Numidians, and endangering Carthage itself. In order to go to the help of his country, Hannibal was forced to abandon Italy in 203, although a preliminary armistice had already been declared and the Carthaginian armies had accepted Scipio's severe terms. That was winter 204 and 203. Hannibal concentrated the remnants of the Carthaginian forces and what will be modern today Tunisia, almost at the very moment when the ambassadors were returning from Rome with the preliminary peace proposals. The Carthaginians broke, and that's why the war continued. Okay, do you know how to keep a promise? Do you know how to follow a contract? Paper, contract, verbally spoken? I think that was a mistake. If you're already going to agree to something, just stick to it. But if you're not like entirely sure about what you sign or about what you agreed to, start negotiations. But just don't pursue a war afterwards, you know? I think that was a mistake. Just try to negotiate again and say like, hey, I think that I've been following your type of pad and treaty and all the stuff, but I think it hasn't been like as advantageous as I think. Can we talk again? Can we make some changes? I can give you this, but you can also give me that, and I think that could facilitate everything between you and me. What do you say? That would have been great. That would have been great, but I hope everyone could just sit and talk. But we're talking about history that didn't happen a lot, right? But I think that was a mistake. I don't know. What do you think? What can we say? Accounts of the campaigns that follow differ greatly, but they culminate at the Battle of Zama, the one we mentioned before. Both Hannibal and Scipio, in order to link up with their respective Median allies, moved up the Bragadas River to the region of Zama. Hannibal was now deficient And actually, the mercenary troops of his front line and the African infantry of his second line together were routed. And Scipio, seeing the Hannibal third line, the veteran soldiers, was still intact, reformed his front and brought up the Numidian cavalry of Massinissa, his Numidian ally, and the Carthaginian rear. Hannibal lost 2,000 men. 2,000. We already counted 15,000 before. He lost 2,000 men. What would you do if you're like a leader and you have a lot of life in place in your shoulder and you just lost in one battle 2,000 men? I will be so demolished. I will be like having this kind of heaviness in my consciousness. I don't know about you, but that is like a large number of people. And we're talking about a lot of years, centuries in the past. So we weren't like a lot around like nowadays. That was like huge amount, greater than today's perspective in terms of numbers, in terms of actual population. So imagine 2,000 men back then. That was huge. But he himself escaped Massinissa's pursuit. That marked the end of Hannibal's military campaigns on behalf of Carthage. So, what else can he do, right? Like, you just lost almost your entire army, and then of course you have this huge disadvantage. I would have liked to know how he was feeling. How was his perspective after that moment, short time after that moment. And once he was like seated, and while he was being trying to be as far as possible of the other part he was fighting against, I would like to know what was going on in his head, because that might have been like a huge strike. But also would like to know what was happening inside his brain. That would have been pretty fascinating to know. And for the records, that's why I really like when we have like diaries and stuff. We have different characters that tell like diaries, but that is pretty valuable because we also have this open chapter about what was going on with the head of this historical character, someone that made it to be like on the books, that was able to lead huge amount of people fighting for his empire, right? We've heard about empires, and trying to conquer and to do great stuff. But inside this person's perspective, what was going on in terms of hopes, in terms of goals, in terms of what he was thinking about courage in the long term, what happened after the war, what he was going to do. Were like any kind of plan of action to follow? Were they going to pursue any type of economic system, political system, different from the others, or the same? What's up with his population? Was it going to be the one ruling the empire? Was it going to be someone else? And also about his emotions, about the personal perspective, about everything. That would have been pretty fascinating to know. A Child and Death of Hannibal. Okay, we're getting there. What happened? The treaty between Rome and Carthage that was concluded a year after the Battle of Zama frustrated the entire object of Hannibal's life, but his hopes of taking arms once more against Rome lived on. Although accused of having misconducted the war by his enemies in Carthage, Hannibal was made a civil magistrate, in addition to retaining his military command. In that role, he was able to overthrow the power of the oligarchic governing faction of Carthage and bring about certain administrative and constitutional changes. Although Scipio, we get back Scipio, who had bested him at Sama, supported his leadership in Carthage, and he became unpopular with a certain faction of the Carthaginian nobility because he challenged their graft. According to Livy, let's say Livy, that led his enemies to denounce him to the Romans for inciting other regions to take up arms against Rome. The strength of that accusation was questionable, but Hannibal was forced to flee. How was that? There he was welcome at first, since another person was preparing war with Rome. Soon, however, the presence of Hannibal and the sound advice he gave concerning the content of the war became a source of embarrassment, and he was sent to rise and command a fleet for Antiochus. He was the other person that was trying to prepare the war against Rome again. In the Phoenician cities, inexperienced, and he was in naval matters, he was defeated by the Roman fleet on the side of Pamphylia. Antiochus was defeated on land at Magnesia in 190, and one of the terms demanded of him by the Romans was that Hannibal should be surrendered. Again, accounts of Hannibal's subsequent actions might change. Either he fled via Crete to the court of King Prusius, or he joined the rebel forces in Armenia. Eventually, he took refuge with Prusius, who at that time was engaged in warfare with Rome's ally, King Eumenes II of Pergamon. He served Prusius in that war, and in one of the victories he gained over Eumenes at sea. It is said that he threw baskets of snakes into the enemy's vessels in one of the earliest documented examples of biological warfare. Oh, Hannibal was smart. Hannibal was smart. That's why he ended up in the box, right? He was smart. But let's continue. The Romans' influence in the East had expanded to such a degree that they were in a position to demand the surrender of Hannibal. He was the national hero. No, please don't. In one account of his final hours, Hannibal, expecting treachery from Bithynia, it was the other region or town or city he wanted to get like some kind of help from, sent out his last faithful servant to check all the secret exits from his fortress in Levisa. That will be nowadays Turkey. One of the parts of Turkey. The servant reported back that hostile unknown guards stood at every exit. Knowing that he had been betrayed and was unable to escape, Hannibal poisoned himself in a final act against the Romans. The year is uncertain, but it was probably 183. He was a fighter to the end. He was a fighter. He was Hannibal. He said like, okay, you want me? I will give myself to you. Yeah, I could do that, but I won't be braided anymore. Just do whatever you want with the body, but I won't be here. Okay? I won't be here. Love it. And that was my charger. Let's continue. Let's talk about his personality. I think this could be like interesting. But what about Escipio? Let's go first with the personality. It is not to be expected that his Roman biographers would treat Hannibal impartially. But we have two people, Polybius and Dio Cassius, that gave the least biased accounts or tales. In spite of the charges of Hannibal's cruelty put forth by the Roman authors, he did enter into agreement with Fabius for the return of prisoners and treated with respect the bodies of Tiberius, that he was a consul in Rome, and Lucius, the fallen enemy generals. If avarice, the other charge commonly laid against him, no direct evidence is found other than the practices necessary for a general to finance a war. Indeed, he spared Fabius's farm in Campania while revenging the surrounding countryside, although that was done to feel rumors that Fabius had reached an accommodation with Hannibal. So he was merciful in some cases, but of course, the enemy accepting this kind of nice treatment, I know that this could lead to some kind of whispers in the air, especially around these times. But that doesn't mean that it makes this like less fair. We're humans, like we cannot forget our humanity just because we don't like the other, and we never should. At some point we need to negotiate with other people, but also negotiate with ourselves whether what we're doing is good or bad. And we also need to understand when to stop, which these people didn't get the memo that fast. But at least they try. Know that this is telling me that they had like this brief moments of like maybe this is wrong, let's do something good at least once. I know you can be my enemy, but I won't treat you like that all the time. So that is when humanity comes to the surface. Much that was said against Hannibal might be ascribed to Roman propaganda, sure. The winner gets the story at the end, especially from Levi. I said I was going to call this person Levi, so just leave it like that. One claim laid against him that he was eating the bodies of his soldiers, oh my god, in times of great difficulty. But Polybius dismisses the charge as an idle suggestion made by the Carthaginian commander and offers no evidence that Hannibal acted upon it. In retrospect, Hannibal's physical bravery is well attested, and his temperance and continence were usually praised. His power of leadership is implied in the lack of riot or inciting riots, and also disharmony. So that was good. His treachery was something that the Romans detested. Something good to know. But he was bold indeed, and he never surrendered to his beliefs. That is something good and bad at the same time, because as I mentioned before, we need to know when to stop. He didn't know when to stop, and then all this happened. But let's talk about Scipio. So Scipio, I don't know what to tell about him, but I would like to say that he was like an important character, right? He was a Roman general noted for his victory over the Carthaginian leader Hannibal in the great Battle of Zama, the last, not the last but decisive one. So Scipio, let's talk about from his point of view, the Battle of Zama. After Scipio's capture of Tunis, the Carthaginians sought peace terms. Hannibal's subsequent return to Africa led to their renewing the war in 202. Hannibal was placed in command of an army of many raw recruits and 80 untrained elephants. Scipio advanced southwestward to join Massinissa, who was taking his invaluable cavalry to Scipio's support. Then Scipio returned eastward to face Hannibal at Zama, having secured the better watering holes and the best terrain. So he had advantage. He arrived first. Always be punctual, guys. Always plan ahead, but if you have to be there before the time, do it. In the first phase of the battle, Scipio largely neutralized the feared Carthaginian war elephants by using skirmishers to draw them into corridors between the densely packed heavy infantry, thus minimizing their impact on the battle. The Battle of Zama also demonstrated that Rome held the advantage in cavalry, especially with the addition of these kind of rebels that were Massinissus Numidians that Hannibal had previously exploited. Taking advantage of the confusion in the wake of the elephant charge, Scipio's cavalry fell on the Carthaginian horsemen, driving them from the field. At first, Scipio's outflanking tactics failed against the master from whom he had learned them, because Hannibal just ate pretty cleverly around his lines and did not allow his first two ranks of soldiers to back up, instead pushing them forward and out to the sides, with his veterans at the rear. The issue was decided when the Roman and Numidian cavalry, having broken off pursuit of the Punic horsemen, fell on the rear of Hannibal's army. Roman victory was complete, and the long war ended. Scipio granted comparatively lenient terms to courage and to Hannibal personally. According to Polybius, this battle marked the first time a Roman could envision a global perspective of future empire. In honor of his victory, Scipio was named Africanus. Like, what does that have to be? But was he named like that by the Africans or by Rome? Because I think there could be like so much difference from who named him like that. But going back, let's go back. What this says here, according to Polybius, this battle marked the first time a Roman could envision a global perspective of future power. With that being said, that is what they wanted, to have like to conquer as much as they wanted. Of course, the territories have their advantages. In Carthage, they have like coasts all over the place. So that was like pretty good to trade, to have some kind of, to trade with other countries, other regions. And from this commerce perspective, that was pretty advantageous to have. But going back to this, how much is too much? How much is too much territory? How much is too many frontiers? How much it is? And of course, how much can you control and manage properly? I don't know if that happened to you in some kind of work or corporations you ever worked before, that the larger the companies, it is more difficult to maintain order, communication between all the departments, and also smooth procedures, because the chain and the operative systems are going to take much time to get everything in place and updated. So it is great to have like territory, to have like land, to take, I don't know, the clever or the smartest parts of the culture of other people, learning from them, while also using the resources that they have, right? Because if you have the land, you have the resources, you have the power to trade with that, to get advantage from that. But how much is too much? So they were trying to picture this great empire, the largest in the world, And at some point, they missed the part that huge projects, they require a great management system, but not good, great. So I think that is when the line becomes blurry. They just start like missing the point of this balance and fortified future. Late years. We also want to talk about the late years of Scipio because we talk about the ones from Hannibal. In 199, Scipio was censored and became some kind of senatus, special title. This was the titular head of the Senate. He held this position until his death, the following 2 pairs of censors having confirmed him in the position. Thought he vigorously supported a policy he argued during his second consulship in 194 against a complete Roman evacuation of Greece after the ejection of Philip V of Macedonia, fearing that Antiochus III of Syria would invade it. And I think this was the fear or constant fear of Rome. After you conquer so many places, of course you're going to have people, pretty angry people, because you just took their homes, you appropriated of their cultures, and now the people from there, they have to live by your laws, something they never did in the past, something they never agreed on. But since you have more power, more military forces, and that you actually want, they have to follow it, right? And they cannot say anything, they cannot argue against it. But people are going to be furious. For example, Hannibal, he wanted his independence, right? And that is a great example of it. It was great to have like a lot of land, but what about the people on that territory? What about the people in all of the territories? They were also increasing like a lot of enemies around. So living in Rome back in the day would have been like something really, not knowing what was going to happen the next day, because as long as they continue conquering, getting more lands, there were going to be like more enemies arising. And of course, they were going to focus on the capital. That is where the consul was at. That is where everything about the life and of course the spirit of Rome was lying at. So would you be living in Rome back in the day? I wouldn't. I think I would not. That was probably what could be considered hardcore nowadays. But what happened then? Well, meantime in Rome, the Scipius political opponents, led by the elder Cato, launched a series of attacks on the Scipius and their friends. Lucius's command was not prolonged. The generous peace terms that Africanus proposed for Antiochus, that was the person who just pursued the war against the Romans, were harshly modified, and the trials of Scipius followed. On the trials, the ancient evidence is confusing. In 187, an attack on Lucius for refusing to account for 500 talents receipts from Antiochus was period. And in 184, Africanus himself may have been accused but not condemned. In any case, his influence was shaken, and he withdrew from Rome to Liternum, where he lived simply on a villa of modest size, cultivating the fields with his own hands. Lucius later contrasted the villa's small and cold bathroom with the luxurious bath of his own day. Scipio had not long to live. However, he got ill. He left this world in 184 or 183 in virtual self-imposed exile from his country and its capital. So at least he was able to choose. Hannibal had to run away. he went out and became a farmer. So at least he was able to has his own choices. His reputation was turning weak, but at least he has like the choices, right? But anyways, he is said to have ordered his burial at Liternum and not in the ungrateful city of Rome. Let's highlight the ungrateful. I don't know if this was what he was thinking or the historian said like, yes, ungrateful city of Rome. It would have been interesting. Where his family tomb laid outside on the Appian way. I want to know if that also can be visible, and if visible, if it is like untouched. I don't think so. They happened like a lot of years ago. But what would you do if you discover like, okay, my generational tree, I have this commander called Scipius, that he was a senate in Rome, but one of the main ones, and then he out-exiled himself, became a farmer, and he got ill and died. That would have been interesting to have in our generational trait. But what do you think about this old story, or just history itself? History is a real base story after all. I think it is pretty interesting. And after this finale, how do you see that there was like ever a chance for this to continue? I still not believe there's like a Punic War number 3, because this was like a great end. Like, you don't have like anything to go to. They had like got dreams already, wanted to spend 2 wars, and Carthage was like trying to get out from the failures over and over again that they faced. How do you see, or where do you see this new war started? Because we're going to talk about Punic number 3, and I'm still like trying to see where to get like to the bottom of this, like where was the cause of the 3rd one. I still don't see it, but stay here, stay in this channel, because I want to talk to you about everything. And I love history. I hope you love it, and please have a nice day, night, evening, whatever you do it with praise. And as I mentioned before, send your kisses always. Bye bye.